Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. So today on the podcast, I'm speaking with Keem Fares again, the mother of Karina, which I've spoken to in episode 25. And she is the mother of Karina, as I said, a spirited and intelligent young gymnast who died in a freak accident when she was 12 years old. Now, if you want to listen to this story in more details, I really highly recommend episode 25. It's one of my most favorite and most interesting conversation I had on the topic of how faith and grief interacts, especially given the fact that, as I said then already, I would call myself a strongly spiritual, but not really a religious person. And so today it's interesting because it sort of fits into the conversation that I have had on the podcast in other episodes around the topic of grieving parents a decade later. And we've been speaking just before about it's coming up to 10 years, Karina's death anniversary. And so we're going to see where today's conversation takes us. So welcome, Keem. Thank you for being here today with us.
Thank you for having me, Natalie. It's such a joy to see you again and speak with you again. I always appreciate our conversations.
So we have had a quite intense time together because in 2017 we worked on Surviving My First Year of Child Loss, the book that was a collection of stories from sort of the first year. How did people deal with the first year after their child's death? And so now we draw this perspective of time and look over a decade. So first of all, I want to stay right in the here and now. So if we spoke a little bit before, but how does it feel for you knowing that we're going to speak about Karina's death and how the grief evolved? How does that feel for you when you tune in right now?
It's both a sense of yes and no, a sense of joy and grief, a sense of love and loss. So it's this beautiful tension that we live in of holding our child and their life and the beauty of that in one hand, and then in the other hand, holding the devastation of their death. So even coming into this conversation today and just thinking about it over the last couple of days, I shared with a friend, I'm feeling heavy. And it's not that I don't want to step into that space. I just know that it is a space that is tender, that is sacred, and I do it willingly. I love to talk about Karina. I love to talk about her life and everything she still is in our own lives. But it still hurts. It's still painful. But it's important. And I so appreciate the opportunity to speak her name. And I love hearing myself referred to as the mother of Karina. Like that is very much still who I am. Mm-hmm. I identify that way. And over the passage of time, it can be challenging if others don't necessarily receive me or perceive me that way. So I so appreciate, thank you for referring to me as the mother of Karina.
Yeah, I can wholeheartedly agree or empathize with you as the mother of one of two, being the twins who is just one with me. And I can wholeheartedly relate to that it's one visible child now, but we are still mothers of both.
Right, yes.
So if you're looking over a decade now with this space of time, because when we wrote Surviving My First Year of Child Loss, it was sort of 5 years, and now we're looking over a decade. How would you say your personal grief, and maybe afterwards in the second part, how has the impact on your family developed over this decade?
The impact on our family, it's such a profound question, and you would think it'd be pretty simple to answer that. But just like with everything that has to do with the death of a child and grief, it's challenging to pinpoint and put it into words. So the impact on our family, it has definitely taken its toll. It has changed who we are, not only as individuals, but also as a family unit. And we've had to fight for our family. We've had to fight to, as individuals, be engaged in our family and remain true to who we are as a unit, as opposed to kind of drift off and succumb to our own grief. I think me in particular, as a mother, and I've seen that with some other mothers, that I had more of a tendency to just retreat into the grief and sit in that space because I felt it so deeply. And I had the luxury of being able to rely on my husband for the necessary income and work and the focus that it takes to do that. And even his involvement in raising our son, and as a father, raising a young man who is deeply affected by the death of his sister. So I've been incredibly blessed in that space. And also, as time has progressed, I've been able to step back and recognize my own responsibility in that, and saying it's necessary for me also to fight for my family and to fight for those relationships and invest in those. I don't do it perfectly yet, but awareness is a step in that direction. And it's something that is important for survival.
So you mentioned fight for your family. Would you be able and willing to give a little bit more context so that we can understand what fighting in that sense means?
For me, it means still being a mother to Mark as a young boy, as an adolescent, as a teenager, and those can be challenging years, as you know. Mm-hmm. And you add to it the component of death in the family, and one that affected us so deeply. And I haven't always been a fully present mother, mm-hmm. whether that's primarily emotionally, really, because we were very intentional in time, in making sure that he was participating in activities and being involved with his teachers at school, making sure that they were aware of emotions that might affect his schoolwork. So I was very involved, but that's not the same thing as emotional engagement. And then you take it one step further. It's easier, it has been easier for me to say, oh, I need to be emotionally engaged with my young son. It's simpler to say I don't need to engage as much emotionally with my husband, because if I only have so much emotion to give, I'm going to mm-hmm. focus my energy where I believe it's more important, which is silly to say because every relationship is important. But when we become very choosy or picky or with where we're going to invest our emotion, because we only have so much to give or so much energy, emotional energy to give. And much of that is given to Karina because I'm invested in my role as her mother and in the relationship as a mother and daughter. And then I also need to engage with Mark as my son. And it takes my energy and intent to also then engage with my husband or my sister-in-law or my father or my friends, because it very much feels like, well, I only have so much that I can give, and so I need to choose where I do that.
Mm. And understandably, the difference to exemplify that is Mark being a child, whereas your husband or the other people that you've mentioned are adults. So right. In terms of emotional energy to give to them, there's a difference as to self-regulation. We would expect that an adult is more able to look after themselves if in your relationship you don't have much energy to give at all. But in that question is, what about yourself? Mm-hmm. What about the emotional energy for yourself? Or because before, when you talked about your grief, you used past tense. Mm-hmm. So there's obviously something that significantly shifted. And I still remember our intense conversations that we had in sort of 2016, 17. So how would you see that progression for yourself, that development?
Well, first, let me start by saying I'm a very selfish person. So if I'm going to choose where to put my emotional energy and bandwidth, very often I choose myself first. And in the early stages of my grief, I had to give myself that permission. And I did do that fully and well. I didn't make excuses for my grief. I didn't reserve my emotion or hold back at all. I gave myself the permission and allowed myself to freely experience and be in the moment of my grief in those early years. So it's easy to be, for me at least, it is easier to be selfish and identify what I need and lean into that and put my energy there. And it's easier to say, well, I need to rely on my husband, or I need his emotional support, or I need him to drive Mark because I don't have the energy to do it today. As opposed to say, well, what does he need from me? And that's the fighting for. The fighting for my family is what is required of me. Not only what do I need from them or from those relationships, but what is necessary from me to invest in those relationships so that they sustain over the length of our grief and the journey that we're on together.
So how has that developed in you? I can assume that the amount of requirements that you had for yourself, because you said I had to fight for my family, has somehow changed over that time.
I think it's more my awareness or willingness to be aware. I probably have been always aware, but I chose to shut it off or say, I don't have the space for that. I don't have the emotional bandwidth for that or the energy, as opposed to saying, well, maybe I do have the energy, and what do I need to give up of my own preferences or my own needs to instead serve my family or invest in my family?
How has your relationship developed with the grief in that space? I mean, you mentioned that you're very lucky to have a husband that is quite able and willing to look after you more so than the other way around, or that's what I understood. But if you're looking at that over this decade, because a lot of people have the fear that a relationship will dissolve after loss of a child. And it's because of these statistics that say that 80 or 90% of families dissolve or relationship dissolves after the loss of a child, which is not very accurate. But in your case, you're obviously still a married couple. But if you're looking at how it has impacted you together as a couple, what would you say?
Karina's death has really changed who we are as individuals. As you know, it just it shapes you into a person who is a different person than who you were before your child's death. So who we were when we met and when we got married, and even who we were as a younger couple when we began to have children and raise our family, I know that I have changed. And also I know that my husband has changed. It hasn't changed the core of who we are. And that's probably why, in our last conversation, I leaned into the faith component, because that is something at the core of who we are. And we can turn back to that and trust that. So I can trust that in my husband. But the fighting for our family, it takes more effort to, as those other things in our person kind of tend to fall away because we can't put the energy into maintaining those. Like, am I still an interesting person? What are my interests? I don't know at this point. Do I care to have interests? Not necessarily. I'd rather put my emotions and energy somewhere else. So, but if I can rely on the core, then it's the rebuilding of an understanding of who I am as an individual and what that means for our family. I don't even know if I'm making sense as I say that, but I'm still trying to understand it myself. But there comes a point when, over the journey of grief, I've had to make the choice of, am I going to live in the grief indefinitely? And there has been a shift in my understanding of what it means to live with grief, which is what I believe I'm doing now, versus the earlier years of Karina's death when I lived in the grief. And for me, that was being fully immersed in the grief. And everything that wasn't that just wasn't important to me. Whether it was my work, to some degree my family, other relationships, news, what's happening in the world. I could honestly say I simply don't care what is happening in the world because of the intensity of living in the grief.
Yeah.
And when I remember very clearly in my first year after Karina's death and being in that space and having conversations with another mother who also, her daughter died, and she was 10 years in at that point. And she was clearly in a different space. And we shared the faith component and affinity to our faith. And I looked at her and I said, I don't know how she got there. And I don't know that I want to be where she is. Because I could see that she was living with the grief, but not in it. And the intensity of the emotion is so overwhelming, it feels like there's no other possible option.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. This is the only way to feel. And so even looking at her, I know it wasn't a sense of admiration. I didn't admire her for where she was. It wasn't even a sense of, it wasn't judgment. It was more like curiosity. Like, because I couldn't fathom arriving at that point. And she admittedly said to me, I was in the same, I completely understand because she was in the same place previously. So now that I'm arriving at this 10-year point, I can say, now I understand where she was at. And it's not that I tried to arrive here. I didn't make an effort to emerge from my grief and shift from a stage of living in it to living with it. It has been a natural progression over time. It has been not a strengthening of will, but just a kind of a shoring up of energy and ability to do things beyond grief and to re-engage with family, to re-engage with work, to re-engage with perhaps some of the things that are going on in the world outside my own space and my own grief. And it happens slowly over time.
And knowing you, I know that you did specific things that I'm assuming, and we would have to ask you, that did something to not just have the time, not just have the space. And I use the analogy often of the person sitting at the side of the road with a broken tire, waiting for things to change will not make the tire be repaired, but maybe flagging someone down or calling for help might actually change that. So that was a really interesting metaphor that you draw, living in grief and living with grief. And also the memory that you have of speaking to someone who was at the 10-year mark, because now we are. So it's really interesting to draw this parallel. And the other thing that comes to mind is a client of mine. She said, and I can't remember that, but apparently I said to her in the first few sessions, I said to her, I promise it will not always feel that way. And she could not imagine, but she took my word for it. And so that is an interesting thing. I mean, if we're looking a little bit closer, I know the things that have happened in your life that have brought meaning or have created meaning as part of the loss. One of them being Karina's Joy Foundation, and maybe other things as well. But I think I want to bring that out, especially because some people might think, okay, I'll just have to wait for 10 years and then I'm there. And that's not entirely the answer. Maybe it's both. What would you say in terms of letting time pass or the actions that we take within that time? How is the ratio for you?
I think you're right. It is both. It's the intentionality of continuing to engage and And not only remain in the grief as long as necessary, as long as healthy, and then re-engaging in the grief in healthy manners, but as necessary, because you also can't turn your back on grief. That's not living either. And I can honestly say that I, 10 years ago, didn't want to live any differently than how I was in that moment. I didn't want to not feel the pain. I didn't want to not live in the grief, because it was so honest to who I was as Karina's mother, like to what I was experiencing as Karina's mother. I read something recently that it was so true, and I don't have the quote with me, but it was something along the lines of, well, no wonder I hurt this much. It's supposed to hurt this much. We love that much and we hurt this much. It's supposed to. And we've heard it say our grief is a testament to our love. And it doesn't mean that as the grief becomes gentler, our love becomes less. It's just that the grief is less intense and less sharp. It's still very much present. It's just not as overpowering. So back to your question, is it time or is it what you do in the time? I think both are necessary. And I will say it's not that I've done anything really, really intentional to kind of progress my relationship with grief. I do what comes naturally and what feels necessary. I do intentionally engage with it and at certain times of the year with certain activities, but it no longer completely rules my day-to-day life. And that's a shift. And I don't necessarily know how I got there. It wasn't, I didn't make a decision to be like, okay, I am 3 years in or 5 years in, things should shift or I should change how I do things. That never happened. It has just probably been the feeling the space opening up in myself, whether that's in my soul, in my mind, in my physical body, and feeling like, okay, I can do this now. One example, I remember in the first year, I probably once or twice only styled my hair. Like after a shower, use the blow dryer, use a straight iron, whatever it is, because it just required too much energy. And I didn't have the capacity to do that. Now I probably style my hair once or twice a week. That's a huge shift. And it's not that, oh, it's so important to me that I decide to do it, so much as I recognize that I have the capacity for that, whether it's the physical strength to do that kind of thing, the emotional engagement of I choose to do it, or even the time in my day that I feel I can carve out the time and make that a priority. So my ability to do things and my determination of how to prioritize things, how important is this to me right now in the moment? Well, the first year my hair was not important in the least. And now it's becoming a bit more important. I can't necessarily tell you why.
Yeah, but it's a good picture to have. And when you spoke before, I had an image coming up about the loss, and I've never had this image of grief, but it's like, it's not so definite, but let's imagine that we hold a space in our psyche for the love that we have towards a person. Let's just imagine. It's not as precise, and if that person's physical presence is no longer there, there's like this hole ripped of that space that I was holding my love for this person. And there's these sharp edges, and this hole is just there like a big gaping wound. And we are watching this wound in despair and in disbelief as to what can happen here. And I think over time, what might happen with and without the things that we do, but it's like edges soften, and slowly life, or our engagement with life, starts to integrate back into this whole. And
it's like it seeps in.
Yeah, it populates it, and it gives new memories and new little things slowly, so that when you look at it, there allows to be a new garden or of something, of life. And I think it's this that requires time, that requires our little ways of allowing that, just like you said with your hair. I didn't put on makeup for at least 18 months after my daughter died. I couldn't care less about makeup at that time. And I'm not a big makeup person anyway, but similar to your hair, it's like it didn't matter. It just did not matter. And I think slowly things come back that matter, not because they're important per se, but just because there's space for it, emotional or whatever. Yeah. And I really love the thing you said about living in grief and living with grief, living alongside. I like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that the metaphor that you're describing right now as it kind of clicks for you actually reminds me of one that I read probably in my first year. And it was a blog post, and I can even tell you the title because that's how much it impacted me. And it was something along the lines of the stone in my pocket, or the stone I carry in my pocket. And it's the metaphor of grief is a sharp, jagged, heavy stone that I've been handed, and I have to carry it. And it's so sharp, it causes me pain. It causes me to bleed. Mm-hmm. And I see the stone in your hand now. Yeah. And and the physicality of that metaphor is so relevant because we feel it so physically, and we feel it so emotionally and mentally. And the blog went on to describe, but over time, the stone that I carry, I still carry it. But over time, I've turned it over in my hand and I see a different facet. And as I manipulate it and carry it, it has become, these sharp edges have become a bit softer because of my interaction with it. And even over time, it's become less heavy as a stone because I've become more accustomed to it. And at some point, it becomes familiar. At some point, it just becomes part of who we are and what we carry throughout life. And we're not going to take the stone out of our pocket and drop it on the beach. We're going to continue to carry it because it's something precious. But over time, it does shape because of our manipulation of it. It does shape who we are because we become accustomed to it and comfortable with it and familiar with it. And that was such a beautiful picture to me and made so much sense that even now, 10 years later, I do reference it frequently in my mind.
Exactly, yeah. So this is my grief crystal or grief stone, similar to what you described. It's one of the metaphors that I often use because, as you were saying, it's heavy. And right. Why do we carry it? Because it's part of us, because it's precious. And we get used to carrying it. We build the resilience,
right,
to carry that part. Yeah. One of the things we discussed last time, which I was so taken by, was your relationship to faith. Because some of the people, they might lose their faith. Some of people might actually lean into their faith. So there's those two options if we're just drawing that in broad strokes. How would you say your faith has been challenged with the loss of Karina, and how did you evaluate your faith over the last decade?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would definitely say my faith has been challenged because it causes you to question if what you believe is true. Is it real enough to sustain the test of this amount of pain? Is it true enough to hold on to those beliefs in spite of what seems to be contradictory to that belief? And that has been more of a decision. It as opposed to, what we were talking about earlier. That has been something that I do think I have had to evaluate and sit with and ask those questions and and then arrive at answers. And whether that is an answer that is felt or also evolved into. But faith, for me, faith is a choice. Faith is defined in Scripture as the belief of the unseen. So faith it's the choice to believe in something that you don't have proof of. You can't see it. And that has been my experience with my faith in grief, is I've had to decide, do I still believe this is true? And if I do, then I need to live or act or grieve this in this manner, even. There's a scripture that say we grieve, but not as others do. So yes, we grieve. Faith doesn't remove grief. It doesn't eliminate the pain of my daughter's death. It doesn't disqualify my love. It doesn't disqualify what I believe to be the existence of God. But it grants an aspect of hope. And it's hope in the unseen. And so my faith allows me to lean into it and say, if I believe this is true, then yes, I will grieve for my daughter, but also I will rejoice because I believe I will see her again. And I know I will see her again. Does that mean this is what I would have chosen for my life? Absolutely not. But that relationship with my faith has, in the early days, it gave me a safe place to go to. It gave me something to fall back on, that I could say, well, I don't know why my daughter died, but I do know that God loves me. I don't understand why God would allow this, but I do know that she is in his hand. And those even don't make sense in the moment, but it provided a core, a center that I could return to and say, this awful thing is happening to me, but I believe this to be true. After moving on from kind of the really, really early days, then that's when the choice came more into it, in saying, well, do I really believe this to be true? Is this at the core of who I am? And if so, what does that mean? And in some part, for example, for me, it has meant, if I really believe this to be true, if I believe that God is real and heaven is real, and my daughter, even in death, is saved and in heaven, then I need to live as though she's not dead. I need to live as though she is alive in another place. And what does that look like? Does that make it easy? Absolutely not.
It would be nice if, but it's not.
Right. So it doesn't make it any easier, but it has helped me make sense of my life. And I don't understand the reasons why Karina died. I don't understand why God allowed that. I don't understand why it happened to us. Those are all questions that every parent asks. And they're very honest questions and very real questions. And so faith for me has meant saying, I don't know the answer to those questions, but I will choose to have confidence in the hope of heaven, and I will choose to rely on God for strength to focus on my family or invest in my marriage or create beauty out of ashes. But that's a little bit of what it has been for me.
How did your family, maybe in comparison to you, how was it for them? I know that you were as a family, whole as a family, are quite invested in your faith. Did you see differences in terms of your husband and Mark?
Probably one of the things that really helped our marriage and allowed us to prioritize our marriage is, in fact, that my husband did kind of have the same experience as I did in this space. So same thing, he has the same questions, he had the same doubts, but he also, independent of me, arrived at the same point of, and yet I will believe, and yet I will have hope, and I will live as though this is true. So seeing him do that, it's an alignment. that we hold as individuals. And it does go back to who we, again, that core of who we are as individuals and who we are as a family. And it allowed me something to hold on to. It gave me something to trust in him, because when I see that he holds on to his own faith that strongly, it allows me to say, okay, I will choose to as well. I can rely on him in that space. I'm not alone.
Yeah.
In that confidence.
Sort of reinforces your belief, I suppose, right?
It does, yeah. And it's another point where we can be united and we can be in agreement when there's so many other things are so difficult to find that common space. Yeah.
So as of recording this, next month is going to be Karina's 22nd birthday, or would be 22nd birthday. And it's also going to be the 10-year anniversary of her death. In what way do you mark this? Do you have any specifics that people around you know about that specific day, or is it very personal to you? How does that happen?
It's both and. There are many people who, yes, are very much aware and are very much invested and supportive. And there are others who perhaps may not realize it. And it's something that I share openly. So I've already taken those days off work. I won't be working on those days. And there are people who know the reasons for why I'm not at work. But it's not necessarily something the whole company knows. And how are we going to mark those days is a hard question, because when we get into the thought process of what do we want to do, it's so hard to, how do you celebrate the 22nd anniversary of your dead daughter? Well, if she were here, what would we be doing? Mm-hmm. And we also don't necessarily know that, because we don't know who she would be 10 years later as a 22-year-old young lady instead of a 12-year-old girl. Yeah. And what would she want to be doing? So each year what we have done is think of what is something that we believe she would enjoy. So we have tried to do something as a family that would be something she would enjoy. So we one year went to an art museum because she enjoyed drawing and painting and was quite the little artist in her own mind. Another year we intended to go horseback riding because that was something that she never did and I'm sure would have been delighted to do. So things like that. We try to find an activity that we can do together as a family that is in her honor, something that she would have enjoyed. Mm-hmm. We haven't really decided what we're going to do this year. Last year was her 21st birthday, so as a birthday, that felt a little more special. We do always buy balloons and cake and go and sit at her grave site and enjoy cake together and then release a balloon, along with some other things that we do throughout the day. What we have found to be good for us as a family is to just set aside that day and do some things that we are doing together. They are reminding us of Karina, but we can also find joy in the moment as we do the activity, so that we always start every single birthday by going to Starbucks and ordering her favorite drink and enjoying Starbucks together. So it's very simple. Yeah. But, Starbucks sends the little birthday notification and they say, come enjoy a free drink on us on your birthday. So we do that. And then we may go to lunch or we may go do an activity and end the day at her gravesite. That's kind of been our process each birthday. And we have held that privately. No one has joined us on that day. It's been intentionally the three of us, my husband and my son. So that has been very special. And we probably will continue that for a long time. And hopefully it will be something that even when Mark no longer lives at home, he celebrates with us.
That's nice. Turning
then to the death anniversary, or the crap anniversary, as I've called it sometimes. But the 10-year anniversary of her death definitely feels heavier than other years. And the 3 hardest days of the year for me every single year have been her birthday, the anniversary of her death, and Mother's Day. Mother's Day is honestly probably the hardest one because I feel it more personally as opposed to sharing it with others. And as I've kind of been thinking ahead of what will February 18th look like for us this year, I don't know yet. And that's part of grief has been learning that sometimes it's okay to make a plan because that's going to feel right in the moment. And other times it's not making a plan because nothing feels right.
Yeah.
And just allowing the day or the emotion to be what it is in the moment.
Yes. I'm thinking whether to share or not. So on this coming Sunday is my mother's 13th death anniversary or crap anniversary, as you say. And what I found as well is that I cannot really know what's going to happen or how I'm going to feel. And every time it's a revelation as to, well, maybe nothing really is, but I always know that the time leading up to it, there's certain things that consume me. So far, I've been dreaming a lot about her, and in my dreams, it's very clear that in my dreams she's alive, and in my dream I think I'm dreaming, but she's alive, which is cool. And yeah, I think to make space for what grief, living alongside grief brings in that time, not just necessarily the day, but in that time ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. That resonates.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for today, Keem. It's been a pleasure delving into this and especially honoring Karina in this way and you as her mother.
Yeah, thank you for that. You're very special and your work is very special. And it's been such a pleasure to witness that and have a small part in it, working with you at certain points. And I'm so grateful to you because I know you've helped many parents, and you have definitely helped me as well. And primarily it's just the understanding of who I am as a mother who lives with grief. So thank you for your work and for everything you do.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.